The armory smelled of metal and oil, a scent that had filled Daewon's lungs for 30 years. His hands moved automatically across the spear's surface, the polishing cloth making soft circles against the dark metal. He didn't need to think anymore. His body knew the work better than his mind did. Around him, hundreds of other humans moved through the vast underground chamber. They cleaned weapons, sharpened blades, and sorted equipment for the Vraxian warriors who owned them. The ceiling stretched so high above that Daewon couldn't see it through the dim light. Giant pillars held up the structure, each one carved with scenes of Vraxian victories over humans. Daewon was 43 years old, though he looked older. His hair had gone gray 5 years ago. His back hurt every morning from sleeping on the thin mat in the slave quarters. But his hands remained steady. That was what mattered. Steady hands kept you alive in the armory. "That one's done," said Hyunwoo, the younger man working beside him. He held up a combat knife, its edge sharp enough to cut through steel. "Overseer Kralthos wants it by the evening shift." Daewon nodded without looking up. Hyunwoo was 25, still young enough to hope for escape. Daewon had stopped hoping a long time ago. Hope hurt more than the work did. The Vraxians had conquered Earth when Daewon was 13. He remembered the sky turning red with their ships, remembered his mother pushing him into a cellar and never seeing her again. The Vraxians took the survivors as slaves and scattered them across their empire. Some worked in mines, some worked in factories. Daewon worked in the armory, and he had learned to be grateful for it. "At least he wasn't dead, Daewon," a soft voice called. Jia appeared beside his workstation, carrying her medical bag. She was the only person in the armory who smiled anymore. "Let me see your hands." He set down the spear and held out his hands. They were covered in small cuts, some fresh and some old. Jia clicked her tongue and began applying a healing gel. "You need to be more careful," she said. "These will get infected." "They always heal," Daewon replied. "That's not the point." Jia finished with his hands and looked at him with concern. "You should rest during the midday break." "You never rest. There's always more work." Jia sighed but didn't argue. She had been a doctor before the conquest, or so she said. Daewon wasn't sure he believed her. It seemed impossible that any of them had been anything other than slaves. The warning bells rang through the armory. Everyone stopped working immediately and moved to the sides of the room. Daewon pressed his back against the wall and kept his eyes down. Heavy footsteps echoed through the chamber. Overseer Kralthos entered with a group of Vraxian soldiers. The Vraxians were tall, nearly 8 feet high, with gray skin and eyes that glowed a faint yellow. They wore armor that hummed with power, and they moved with the confidence of a species that had never lost a war. "Slave workers," Kralthos announced, his voice booming across the armory. "We have received a special shipment. Ancient weapons from an archaeological dig. They require immediate cataloging and cleaning." Daewon watched as soldiers wheeled in large containers. They set them down in the center of the room and began opening them. Inside were weapons, dozens of them, all covered in dirt and age. "You," Kralthos pointed at Daewon. "You have the most experience with old weapons. You will handle the cataloging." Daewon bowed his head. "Yes, Overseer." The Vraxians left, their footsteps fading back into the distance. The other slaves slowly returned to their work, but Daewon moved toward the containers. Hyunwoo followed him. "Be careful with these," Hyunwoo whispered. "They look dangerous." Most of the weapons were standard Vraxian equipment, just old. Daewon sorted them quickly, marking each one in the catalog system. But at the bottom of the last container, wrapped in layers of warning tape, was something different. A spear. It was longer than the standard Vraxian weapons, and its metal was black as empty space. The shaft was covered in symbols that Daewon had never seen before. At its center was a crystal core that seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. Warning tags hung from it in 3 different languages, all saying the same thing: "Handle with extreme caution." "What is that?" Hyunwoo asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know." Daewon reached out slowly. The moment his fingers touched the spear, cold rushed through his arm. Not painful, but shocking, like touching winter itself. He pulled his hand back quickly. "Did you feel that?" he asked. Hyunwoo shook his head. "Feel what?" Daewon looked at the spear again. The crystal core pulsed, and for just a moment he thought he heard something. A whisper. A voice at the edge of hearing speaking words he couldn't understand. "Daewon?" Jia appeared beside them. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I'm fine." He wasn't fine. His heart was racing and his hands were shaking. I just need to catalog this one. He picked up the spear carefully, using both hands this time. The cold feeling came again, but now it felt almost familiar, comfortable. The weight of the spear was perfect, balanced in a way that made it feel like an extension of his arms rather than a separate object. As he carried it to his workstation, Day One noticed that the other slaves were staring. Not at him, but at the spear. Even the Vraxian guard at the far end of the room had turned to look, his hand moving instinctively toward his own weapon. Day One set the spear down on his table and began the careful work of cleaning it. The metal was incredibly strong, stronger than anything he had worked with before. The symbols along the shaft seemed to shift when he looked at them from different angles, forming patterns that almost made sense. Hours passed. Day One worked through his break, through the evening meal into the night shift. He couldn't stop. Every time he thought about putting the spear aside, something pulled him back to it. The whispers at the edge of his mind grew stronger, though he still couldn't make out the words. "You should stop," Gia said, appearing beside him again. "The night shift ends in an hour. You've been working on that one weapon all day." "I know." Day One's voice sounded distant even to himself. "I just need to finish." Gia placed her hand on his shoulder. "Day One, what's wrong with you?" He wanted to tell her. Wanted to explain the cold feeling, the whispers, the way the spear seemed to be alive in his hands. But he didn't have the words. And even if he did, what would she think? That 30 years of slavery had finally broken his mind. "Nothing's wrong," he said. "I'm just tired." That night, in his narrow sleeping space, Day One dreamed of fire. Blue-white flames that didn't burn but illuminated. He saw warriors he had never met, fighting battles in places he had never been. He saw humans standing tall, unbroken, facing impossible enemies with courage he couldn't imagine. And through it all, the spear blazed in their hands. When he woke, his heart was pounding and his hands were reaching for something that wasn't there. The spear was locked in the armory, 3 levels above him. But somehow he could still feel it, calling to him, choosing him. Day One had been a slave for 30 years. He had learned not to hope, not to fight, not to dream of freedom. But as he lay in the darkness listening to hundreds of other slaves breathing around him, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Change was coming. The dreams didn't stop. Every night for a week, Day One saw the same visions. Warriors fighting with weapons that blazed with impossible light. Humans who refused to kneel before the Vraxian Empire. Battles that should have been losses turning into victories through courage and sacrifice. During the day, he couldn't stop thinking about the spear. It sat on his workstation, half cleaned, waiting for him. Every time he touched it, the cold feeling returned, but now it felt less like a warning and more like a greeting. "You're obsessed with that thing," Yunwu said one morning. He was sharpening a set of combat knives, his hands moving with practiced speed. "It's just a weapon. An old one, sure, but still just metal and crystal." "It's not just metal," Day One said quietly. He ran his polishing cloth along the spear's shaft, revealing more of the strange symbols underneath centuries of dirt. "Look at these markings. Have you ever seen writing like this?" Yunwu leaned closer and squinted at the symbols. "No, they don't look Vraxian." "What language is it?" "I don't know." Day One had been wondering the same thing. The symbols seemed familiar somehow, like a memory from childhood that he couldn't quite grasp. "But I want to find out." The armory had a small archive room, where the Vraxians kept records of weapon designs and historical battles. Slaves weren't allowed inside, but Day One had learned the door codes years ago by watching the guards. He had never used them before. There had never been a reason to risk it. That night, after the evening shift ended and most of the slaves had returned to their quarters, Day One slipped away. His heart pounded as he approached the archive door. If he was caught, the punishment would be severe. Possibly death. But the whispers in his mind pushed him forward. The door opened with a soft hiss. Inside, the archive was filled with data screens and storage units. Day One had memorized the layout from watching Vraxian technicians work. He moved quickly to the historical weapons section and began searching. Most of the records were about Vraxian victories. Battle after battle, conquest after conquest. Day One had seen some of this before, in the carvings on the pillars. But he kept searching, looking for anything about ancient human weapons. Finally, buried in a file marked as low priority, he found it. A brief report about archaeological digs on human worlds looking for pre-conquest artifacts. One entry caught his attention. Spear of the Last Stand. Origin unknown. Recovered from sealed chamber on Earth. Estimated age over 3,000 years. Warning. Artifact demonstrates unusual energy readings. Handle with caution. Current status transferred to Armory Station for evaluation. Daewon's hands shook as he read. 3,000 years old. This spear had existed before the Vraxian Empire, before humans had ever reached the stars. It was a relic from a time he couldn't even imagine. He dug deeper into the files, finding fragments of information. There were legends about human champions, warriors who wielded special weapons in the final days before the conquest. The weapons were said to choose their bearers, bonding with them through some ancient technology that even the Vraxians didn't understand. The Spear of the Last Stand was one of 12 such weapons. All of them had been lost when humanity fell. This was the first one found in 70 years. What are you doing? Daewon spun around. Gia stood in the doorway, her medical bag in one hand and a shocked expression on her face. Gia, I can explain. You broke into the archive? She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Do you know what they'll do if they catch you? I know, but I had to find out about the spear. Gia looked at the screen behind him, reading the information. Her eyes widened. 3,000 years old? And it chooses its bearer? She turned back to Daewon. You think it's choosing you? I don't know. Maybe. Every time I touch it, I feel something. And the dreams. Dreams? Gia moved closer, her doctor instincts taking over. What kind of dreams? Daewon told her everything. The visions of warriors. The battles. The feeling that the spear was speaking to him even though he couldn't understand the words. Gia listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned. This is dangerous, she said when he finished. Not just breaking in here. The spear itself. If it really is what these files say, if it's choosing you, then the Vraxians will never let you keep it. I know. Then why are you doing this? Why risk it? Gia grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Daewon, you've survived 30 years by keeping your head down. Don't throw that away now. I'm not throwing it away. Daewon looked at his friend, trying to make her understand. For 30 years, I've polished weapons for people who killed my family. I've kept my head down, done my work, and survived. But that's all I've done. Survived, I've never lived. Living gets you killed. Maybe. But this spear, these visions, they're showing me something. Humans who fought back, who didn't just survive but actually stood against the Empire. What if that's still possible? Gia stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. You've gone insane. 30 years finally broke you. But there was no anger in her voice, only sadness. Come on, we need to get out of here before someone notices. They left the archive, Daewon carefully erasing any trace of his access. As they walked back toward the slave quarters, Gia spoke quietly. If you're right about the spear, if it really is choosing you, then something is going to happen soon. The Vraxians won't let an ancient human weapon just sit in an armory. They'll either lock it away or destroy it. I know. What will you do? Daewon didn't have an answer. He was a slave who polished weapons. He had never fought in his life. Never even held a weapon as anything other than an object to maintain. The idea of actually using the spear of fighting Vraxian warriors seemed impossible, but the whispers in his mind said otherwise. The next day, Overseer Kralthos came to the armory with news. The ancient spear has attracted attention from Commander Thex, he announced. He wishes to add it to his personal collection. The transfer will happen in 3 days. Daewon felt his stomach drop. 3 days. That was all the time he had left with the spear. He spent every waking moment working on it. The symbols along the shaft became clearer as he removed the layers of age and corrosion. They were definitely human writing, he realized. Ancient human writing from before the conquest, from a time when humans had been strong. The crystal core pulsed brighter each day, its internal light growing stronger. And the whispers became words, still unclear but more insistent. They spoke of duty and sacrifice, of champions and courage, of a choice that would change everything. On the 3rd day, as Daewon prepared the spear for transfer, Hyunwoo approached him with unusual nervousness. Whatever you're thinking of doing, Hyunwoo said quietly, don't do it alone. There are others who are tired of being slaves, others who would fight if someone gave them a reason to. I'm not thinking of doing anything, Daewon lied. Hyunwoo gave him a look that said he didn't believe that for a second. Just remember, you're not alone. You never were. That afternoon, Commander Thex arrived with an escort of elite soldiers. He was a high-ranking Vraxian warrior, decorated with medals from 100 battles. His presence made all the slaves in the armory press themselves against the walls, trying to become invisible. "Bring me the ancient spear," Thex commanded. Overseer Kralthos gestured to Daewon. "You, present the weapon to the commander." Daewon's hands were steady as he lifted the spear. It was fully clean now, its black metal gleaming under the armory lights. The symbols along its shaft seemed to glow faintly. The crystal core pulsed with inner light. As he walked toward Commander Thex carrying the spear in both hands, something changed. The whispers in his mind became a roar. The cold feeling spread through his entire body, and suddenly the visions were crystal clear. He saw the last battle of the human champion, standing alone against thousands of Vraxian warriors. He saw the spear blazing with blue-white fire cutting through armor and shields. He saw humans fighting with weapons that chose them, that bonded with them, that made them into something more than ordinary people. The spear was speaking to him now, clear as day. Not in words, but in pure meaning. "Choose," it said. "Submit or stand. Kneel or fight. Live as a slave or die as a warrior." Daewon stood before Commander Thex holding the spear of the last stand. Around him dozens of slaves watched. Above him Vraxian soldiers waited, and in his hands an ancient weapon hummed with power, ready to make its choice. 3 days ago he would have handed over the spear and returned to his work. 3 days ago he was just a slave who polished weapons, but that was 3 days ago. Commander Thex reached for the spear, his massive hand stretched toward the black metal shaft, expecting to take it as easily as one takes any other weapon. Daewon stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him to let go, to hand it over, to survive another day. Then the spear chose. Blue-white fire exploded along the shaft. Not burning heat, but cold flame that blazed with ancient power. The spear became immovable in Daewon's hands, as if it had bonded to his bones, become part of him. Commander Thex's hand stopped inches from the metal, unable to touch it. "What is this?" Thex snarled. He tried again, forcing his hand forward. The moment his skin made contact with the spear, the flames surged. The commander jerked back with a roar of pain and anger. "Impossible! A slave cannot bond with a champion's weapon." The entire armory had gone silent. Hundreds of slaves and dozens of Vraxian soldiers stared at the impossible sight before them. A human holding a blazing weapon. A slave refusing to hand over property to his master. Overseer Kralthos stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Put down the weapon immediately." Daewon wanted to obey. Every habit built over 30 years told him to submit, to apologize, to do whatever it took to survive. But his hands wouldn't let go. The spear held him as much as he held it. And through their connection he felt something awakening inside himself, something that had been sleeping for 70 years since the day humanity fell. "Put it down," Kralthos shouted again. "He can't." Jia's voice came from somewhere in the crowd of slaves. "The weapon has chosen him. It won't allow anyone else to touch it." Commander Thex's eyes blazed with fury. "Then he will die with it." "Guards, kill this slave!" The Vraxian soldiers moved forward, weapons raised. Daewon's mind went blank with terror. He had never fought in his life. He was going to die here, holding a weapon he didn't know how to use, but the spear knew. The first soldier swung his blade. Daewon's body moved without thought, the spear rising to block. The clash of metal sent shockwaves through the armory. The soldier stumbled back, shocked. Daewon was just as shocked. He hadn't decided to block. The spear had moved his arms, guided his motion, shown him exactly where the attack would come from. 2 more soldiers attacked from different angles. Again, Daewon moved, the spear flowing through defensive patterns he had never learned. The blue-white flames extended from the blade, forming barriers of pure energy that deflected strikes. His feet found perfect positioning. His body twisted with impossible grace for a man who had spent 30 years hunched over a work table. "This is impossible," one of the soldiers muttered, backing away. But it wasn't impossible. The spear was showing Daewon how to fight, feeding him knowledge from every champion who had ever wielded it. He saw their techniques, felt their experience, understood their strategies. For 3 minutes, a middle-aged slave held off a dozen elite Vraxian warriors. Then reality set in. The spear could guide his movements, but Daewon's body was still weak from decades of poor food and hard labor. His muscles burned. His lungs gasped for air. Against trained soldiers who fought for a living, he couldn't win. Commander Thex seemed to realize this too. A cruel smile crossed his face. Surround him. He'll tire soon enough. More soldiers closed in. Daewon backed toward the wall. The spear moving in defensive circles, but he could feel his strength fading. This was how he would die, fighting for 3 minutes instead of submitting. Maybe that was enough. Maybe dying as a warrior was better than living as a slave. Then the explosion hit. The power core on the far side of the armory erupted in flames. Soldiers scattered as equipment went flying. Alarms blared through the station. Through the smoke and chaos, Daewon saw Hyunwoo standing near the blast site, a makeshift detonator in his hands. "Run," Hyunwoo shouted. "Everyone run!" The slaves didn't need to be told twice. Decades of suppressed desperation burst free. They scattered in every direction, grabbing weapons from the workstations, overwhelming the guards with sheer numbers. It wasn't organized. It wasn't planned. But it was happening. Jia appeared at Daewon's side, grabbing his arm. "The maintenance tunnels. I've been memorizing them for years." "Follow me." They ran through the chaos. Behind them, Commander Thex roared orders, trying to restore control. Vraxian soldiers chased after the fleeing slaves, but there were so many targets now, too many directions at once. Daewon followed Jia through a door marked for maintenance only. Inside was a network of narrow tunnels that ran through the station's infrastructure. Other slaves followed, maybe 60 of them, all looking to Daewon and his blazing spear for leadership he didn't know how to give. "Keep moving," Jia shouted. She led them through twisting passages, past power conduits and water lines, deeper into the station's guts. "The docking bays are 3 levels down." "We'll never make it," someone cried. "They'll seal the exits." "Then we die trying," another voice answered. They ran through the maintenance tunnels, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. The spear's light showed them the way, its flames never dimming. Daewon's body should have collapsed from exhaustion, but somehow the weapon sustained him, sharing its strength. They burst out of the tunnels into a corridor leading to the docking bays. Ahead, massive doors stood open, showing rows of transport ships. Behind, Vraxian soldiers poured into the corridor, weapons charging. "Go!" Daewon turned to face their pursuers. The spear blazed brighter, responding to his determination. "Get to the ships. We're not leaving you." Hyunwoo grabbed a maintenance tool from the wall, wielding it like a weapon. "Yes, you are." Daewon planted himself in the corridor. The spear showed him a defensive stance, how to hold the narrow space against multiple attackers. "Someone needs to give you time." Jia stepped beside him, her face set with determination. "Then we hold them together." Before Daewon could argue, 10 more slaves joined them, forming a ragged line. None of them were warriors. Most held improvised weapons. But they stood anyway, choosing this moment to stop running. The Vraxian soldiers charged. What happened next was chaos. The spear guided Daewon's strikes, turning his desperate defense into something almost beautiful. The blue-white flames cut through armor and shields. Energy barriers deflected shots that should have killed him. But he wasn't alone. The slaves fought beside him with desperate courage, using whatever they could find as weapons. They held for 2 minutes. Long enough for the others to reach the ships and start the engines. Long enough for the impossible to become real. "Fall back." Jia grabbed Daewon's arm. "The ships are ready." They ran for the docking bay, the Vraxian soldiers right behind them. A transport ship hovered at the entrance, its loading ramp down. Daewon saw Hyunwoo in the pilot seat, frantically working the controls. "Come on," Hyunwoo shouted. They jumped onto the ramp. Behind them, energy blasts scorched the metal. The ship lurched into motion, the ramp beginning to close. Daewon turned and saw Commander Thex standing at the bay entrance, his face twisted with rage. "You cannot escape," Thex roared. "The Empire will hunt you across every star." The ramp sealed shut. Through the viewport, Daewon watched the war moon shrink as they accelerated away. 2 more transport ships followed them, packed with freed slaves. Behind, Vraxian fighters launched in pursuit. In the pilot seat, Hyunwoo worked controls he barely understood. "Where do we go?" No one answered. They were escaped slaves in stolen ships carrying a weapon that every Vraxian in the galaxy would now be hunting. They had no destination, no plan, no hope of survival beyond the next few hours. Daewon looked down at the spear in his hands. It still blazed with cold fire, its light filling the transport's interior. Through their connection, he felt the weapon's purpose, It hadn't chosen him to die in an armory. It had chosen him to fight, to lead, to be something he had never imagined. "The Ash Nebula," said an old woman near the back of the ship. "I heard guards talking about it. A place where sensors don't work, where ships can hide. It's 3 days from here." 3 days is a long time with Vraxians chasing us, Hyunwoo said. Daewon moved to stand beside the pilot, looking out at the stars ahead. For 30 years he had looked down at his work, keeping his gaze low and his head empty. Now he looked up and the galaxy stretched before him, vast and terrifying and full of possibility. "Then we better not waste them," he said. "Set course for the Ash Nebula." The spear pulsed in agreement, its flames burning bright. Behind them, the war moon fell away into darkness. Ahead, freedom or death awaited. Daewon wasn't sure which one would come first, but for the first time in 30 years, he was ready to find out. The Ash Nebula looked like death from the outside. Thick clouds of radiation and debris stretched across space, glowing a dull red from the dying star at its center. Ship sensors went haywire the moment they entered, screens filling with false readings and phantom contacts. It was the perfect place to hide. It was also the perfect place to die. "We're losing power to the rear engines," Hyunwoo announced from the pilot seat. Their stolen transport had been designed for short trips between stations, not 3-day flights through hostile space. The other 2 ships were in similar condition, barely holding together. Daewon stood in the cramped cargo bay, looking at the 63 people who had followed him. They were exhausted, hungry, and scared. Most had injuries from the escape. All of them were looking to him for answers he didn't have. "We made it," Gia said softly beside him. "That's something. We made it to the middle of nowhere with no food, damaged ships, and the entire Vraxian Empire hunting us." Daewon shook his head. "I don't know what to do next." The spear rested against the wall, its flames dimmed but still present. Since the escape, Daewon had been feeling its presence constantly in his mind, not controlling him but sharing information. He knew things he shouldn't know. Combat tactics, ship specifications, strategic planning. The weapon was teaching him, preparing him, but for what? Over the next few days they explored the nebula, searching for anything useful. They found plenty of death. Wrecked ships from old wars floated in the debris, some human and some Vraxian, all gutted by time and radiation. But then they found something else. "There's a structure ahead," called Tai Yang, a young man who had revealed he once trained as a pilot before his capture. "It's old, but some systems are still active." The structure was a space station, ancient and half destroyed, but with a few sections that still had power. They docked carefully and began to explore. Inside, they found supplies left behind by whoever built this place. Preserved food, medical equipment, and most importantly, a database that still functioned. Bora, an older woman who had worked in Vraxian archives for 15 years, immediately started accessing the files. "This was a human military outpost," she said, her voice shaking with excitement. "From before the conquest. These files contain weapons data, training programs, even the locations of other hidden caches." Daewon stood beside her, looking at the screens. Names and faces of human soldiers scrolled past. People who had fought in the First War 70 years ago. They all looked so proud, so certain of victory. None of them knew they would lose everything. "Look at this." Bora pointed at one file. "It's an AI core, something called Aegis, designed to preserve human military knowledge. The file says it's still operational in this station. They spent hours searching until they found it. A sealed chamber deep in the station's core. Inside, crystalline processors glowed with faint life. When Daewon approached, they flared brighter. A voice spoke, calm and mechanical. "Identity confirmed. Champion detected. Weapon signature matches Spear of the Last Stand. Welcome back, warrior. It has been 72 years, 4 months, and 16 days since the last champion stood in this place." "Aegis?" Daewon asked. "You're the AI?" "Correct. My function is to train champions in the art of war, to preserve humanity's martial heritage and to assist in the defense of our species. You have bonded with one of the 12 ancient weapons. This makes you a champion regardless of your experience or background. I'm not a champion. I'm just a slave who got lucky. The Spear of the Last Stand does not choose through luck. It judges courage, determination, and the capacity to grow. You were chosen because you possess these qualities. Now we must develop them." Aegis activated training programs that had been sleeping for decades. Virtual reality simulations, tactical scenarios, combat techniques from humanity's greatest warriors. The training was brutal. Day one spent hours each day in simulations, learning to fight properly instead of relying only on the spear's guidance. His body began to change. The spear's energy was healing years of damage from poor food and hard labor. Muscles grew stronger. Reflexes quickened. His mind adapted to tactical thinking, seeing patterns in combat he never would have noticed before. But he wasn't the only one training. Hyunwoo studied ship combat and squadron tactics. Jia learned battlefield medicine far beyond what she had known. Others found their own purposes: mechanics, engineers, tacticians. The group of escaped slaves was slowly becoming something else. Then the hunters arrived. The Vraxian scout ships entered the nebula without warning. Only 2 ships, but that was enough. They had tracked the stolen transports somehow, followed the trail through space. "We need to fight them," Hyunwoo said. "If even one escapes to report our location, they'll send a fleet." Daewon looked at his people. They weren't ready. Most still barely knew how to hold a weapon. But Hyunwoo was right. If they ran now, they would spend the rest of their short lives running. "Get everyone into combat suits," Daewon ordered. "Aegis, load the defensive protocols." "We defend this station." The battle was brief and terrifying. The Vraxian scouts landed boarding parties, expecting to find frightened slaves. Instead, they found humans in old but functional combat armor, fighting with coordinated tactics. And leading them was Daewon, no longer moving just on the spear's guidance but with his own growing skill. The spear's flames cut through Vraxian armor. Energy barriers protected his allies. But more importantly, Daewon was thinking during the fight, using the station's layout to his advantage, setting traps, coordinating with his team. This wasn't instinct anymore. This was learned skill. They won. Both Vraxian ships were disabled, their crews captured or killed. But the victory felt hollow. Where there were 2 scouts, more would follow. "They know we're here now," Bora said, examining the scouts' communication logs. "They sent a signal before we could stop them. A full fleet will arrive within a week." The group gathered in the station's command center, all looking to Daewon. He stood before them with the spear, feeling its weight not just in his hands but on his shoulders. These people had followed him, trusted him, and now he had to decide their fate. "We can't run forever," he said slowly, "and we can't hide forever. The Vraxians will never stop hunting us as long as we have this spear." "Then what do we do?" someone asked. Daewon looked at the spear, at its cold flames burning steady. Through their connection, he felt the weapon's purpose more clearly than ever. It hadn't chosen him to hide. It had chosen him to fight back, to remind the galaxy that humanity could still stand against tyranny. "Bora," he said, "you said there are other hidden caches out there. Other weapons. Maybe even other people who escaped the conquest." "Yes. The files show at least a dozen locations scattered across this sector. Then we find them. We gather whatever weapons and allies we can. We become strong enough that the Vraxians can't just crush us." "That's insane," someone protested. "We're 63 people with 3 broken ships and 1 ancient weapon. The Vraxians have billions of soldiers and thousands of warships." "I know." Daewon raised the spear, its flames brightening. "But this weapon was made to fight impossible battles. And right now, we're the only ones fighting at all. Every slave in the galaxy is watching to see what happens to us. If we hide and die, they'll know there's no hope. But if we fight, if we show them that humans can still stand against the Empire, maybe others will join us." Silence filled the command center. Then Hyunwoo stepped forward. "I'm with you. I've been a slave my whole life. I'd rather die fighting than live on my knees." Jia nodded. "Where you go, I go." One by one, others stepped forward. Not all of them. Some were too afraid, too broken by years of slavery. But most stood beside Daewon, ready to follow him into what would probably be their deaths. "Aegis," Daewon said, "can you give us a course to the nearest cache?" "Affirmative. Preparing navigation data now. But Champion, I must warn you, the path ahead will be difficult. Many will die. The Vraxian Empire does not forgive rebellion." "I know." Daewon looked at the faces around him, seeing hope and fear mixed together. "But we're done being slaves. Whatever comes next, at least we'll face it as free people." The spear pulsed in agreement, its flames burning bright. In the darkness of the Ash Nebula, surrounded by the wreckage of old wars, a new rebellion was being born. Small, desperate, and probably doomed. But it was a beginning. 6 months changed everything. Daewon stood on the bridge of the Defiance, a captured Vraxian patrol ship that now served as the flagship of their growing fleet. Around him, tactical displays showed 12 ships, not counting the smaller fighters and transports. 300 people now followed him, most of them freed slaves. But some were volunteers from alien species tired of Vraxian rule. The man looking back at him from the polished metal wall was almost unrecognizable. His body had filled out with proper food and training. His gray hair was cut short and practical. His eyes held a sharpness that came from making life and death decisions every day. The spear rested on his back, its flames a constant presence. Fourth supply depot raid was successful, Yunwu reported. We liberated another 40 slaves and captured enough food and ammunition for 2 months. Yunwu had become an excellent strategist, planning their raids with precision. Taeyang commanded their small fleet with growing confidence. Bora managed their intelligence network, piecing together information from captured data files. And Jia led their medical operations while somehow keeping Daewon grounded when the weight of leadership became too much. But success had brought new problems. You need to rest, Jia said that evening, entering his quarters without knocking. She had stopped asking permission months ago. When was the last time you slept more than 3 hours? I sleep enough. You don't. She sat beside him, her expression serious. The spear is burning through you, Daewon. I can see it in your blood tests, in the way your hands shake when you think no one is watching. Your body can't sustain this pace. It has to. We're finally making progress. 4 raids in 2 months, no casualties. The Vraxians are starting to fear us. And you're starting to scare me. Jia took his hand. You're not the same person who polished weapons in that armory. Sometimes I look at you and wonder if the spear is using you instead of you using it. Her words struck deeper than any blade. Daewon looked at the spear hanging on the wall, its flames casting shadows across the room. She was right. He could feel the weapon's influence growing stronger, its ancient consciousness pushing him toward more battles, more risks, more violence. I'm still me, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Before Jia could respond, alarms blared through the ship. They rushed to the bridge where Hyunwoo was coordinating responses to multiple reports. We have a problem, Hyunwoo said grimly. Our base in the Ash Nebula just went dark. Communications are dead. Vraxian attack? Daewon asked. Possibly. But there's more. I'm receiving reports from our intelligence network. The Empire has assigned someone specific to hunt us. Huntmaster Vexrel, their most successful tracker. He's never failed a mission in 40 years. The name meant nothing to Daewon, but the worry on Hyunwoo's face was clear. How bad is this? Very bad. Vexrel doesn't just hunt targets. He studies them, learns their patterns, predicts their moves. And he's patient. He'll spend months setting up the perfect trap. Then we need to be unpredictable. That's harder than it sounds. We need supplies, which means raiding Vraxian depots. We need recruits, which means going to slave stations. Our options are limited, and he knows that. Daewon studied the star map, looking at their possible targets. Hyunwoo was right. They were predictable because they had to be.
Every freed slave needed food. Every ship needed fuel. Every weapon needed ammunition.
Their needs created patterns that a skilled hunter could track. We need more resources, Bora said from her station. I've been decrypting files from our raids. There's a location, coordinates for something called Haven Station. The files are old and partially corrupted, but it might be one of the hidden human colonies from the war. A colony. Jia moved closer to look at the data. You mean free humans? How many? Unknown. The file suggests thousands, maybe more, if it still exists. Hope flickered in Daewon's chest. They weren't alone. Other humans had survived the conquest, built something in hiding. If they could find this Haven Station, join forces with them, they might actually have a chance. Set course for... The ship rocked violently. Alarms screamed as weapon impacts hit their shields. On the view screen, Vraxian warships appeared from behind a debris field, perfectly positioned to ambush. It's a trap, Taeyang shouted from the pilot station. They were waiting for us. More ships appeared, at least 10 of them surrounding the small rebel fleet. Daewon's mind raced. How had they known? They had been so careful with their route, varied their patterns, then he understood. We have a spy. Someone leaked our position. The battle was chaos. Their 12 ships tried to break through the Vraxian formation, but the enemy had planned perfectly. 3 rebel ships exploded in the first minute. Escape pods launched as crews abandoned the dying vessels. We can't win this, Hyunwoo shouted over the noise of weapon impacts. We need to run. Run where? Daewon grabbed his spear from its mount. They have us surrounded. On the view screen, he saw their hidden base in the asteroid field under direct assault. The station they had spent months building, where 90 people remained, was being torn apart by Vraxian firepower. The base, Gia whispered. All those people. Daewon felt the spear surge with power, responding to his desperation. The weapon showed him a possibility, a way to save them, but the cost would be enormous. I can create a shield, he said. The spear can project a barrier large enough to cover the base, but I'll need time to channel the power. How much time? Hyunwoo asked. 7 minutes, maybe 10. You'll die, Gia grabbed his arm. Channeling that much power will kill you. Maybe, but if I don't, 90 people will definitely die. He didn't give her time to argue. Moving to the center of the bridge, Daewon planted the spear and began channeling its energy. The cold flames exploded outward, brighter than they had ever been. Through the spear, he felt his own life force flowing into it, feeding the ancient weapon's power. The shield formed around the asteroid base, a massive dome of blue-white energy that deflected Vraxian fire. But maintaining it was agony. Every second felt like hours. Daewon's vision blurred. His hands began to bleed from gripping the spear so tightly. Ships are evacuating from the base, Taeyang reported. But we need more time. I'm giving you more time, Daewon gasped. His legs shook. The spear was consuming him, burning through his body to power the shield. Gia stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder, lending what strength she could. 6 minutes, 7, 8. The evacuating ships cleared the base perimeter. But Daewon could feel his consciousness fading. The spear was demanding more than he had to give. Then Hyunwoo was there, grabbing him around the waist. Drop the shield. Everyone's clear. Can't, Daewon managed. His hands were fused to the spear. Won't let go. Yes, it will. Gia pressed her hands against the spear's shaft. Because you're going to tell it to. You're the champion, not the weapon. You control it, not the other way around. Through the haze of pain, Daewon heard her words. She was right. The spear had chosen him, but he was still himself. He still had the final choice. With an effort that nearly stopped his heart, Daewon commanded the spear to release him. The flames dimmed. The shield collapsed. He fell backward into Hyunwoo's arms, barely conscious. Get us out of here. Hyunwoo shouted to Taeyang. The rebel fleet scattered, each ship fleeing in a different direction. The Vraxians pursued, but the confusion of multiple targets gave the rebels enough time to reach jump distance. One by one, the ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind their destroyed base and the wreckage of 3 vessels. Hours later, Daewon woke in the medical bay. His body ached in ways he didn't know were possible. Gia sat beside his bed, her face exhausted. How many? He asked. We lost 90 people from the destroyed ships. Everyone from the base survived. The spy was caught, Sung-ho. He thought surrendering was the only way to save lives. Where is he? Dead. He took his own life after realizing what he'd done. Gia touched his hand gently. You saved them, Daewon. All of them. But you nearly died doing it. Worth it, was it? Because you almost left us without a leader, without a champion. You can't save everyone by sacrificing yourself. Daewon looked at the spear, now resting quietly against the wall. Its flames were barely visible, dim and exhausted. For the first time since it chose him, the weapon felt distant, as if it too needed to recover. We need to find Haven Station, he said. We need allies, resources, safety. We can't keep doing this alone. I agree. Bora has the coordinates. Taeyang says it will take 3 weeks to reach them. 3 weeks of running. Daewon closed his eyes. I'm tired of running. Then rest now. We're safe for the moment. As Gia left to check on other patients, Daewon lay in the darkness, feeling the weight of leadership pressing down on him. They had lost their base, lost people, lost their sense of safety, but they had also survived. And as long as they survived, hope remained. The spear pulsed softly, agreeing. The fight wasn't over. It had barely begun. Haven Station was real. Daewon stood on the bridge of the Defiance, staring at the massive structure hidden in the gravity well of a black hole. It was a generation ship, modified and expanded over decades, home to 50,000 free humans who had escaped the conquest 70 years ago. Lights glowed across its surface, evidence of life and civilization that the Vraxian Empire believed extinct. They've been here the whole time, Gia whispered beside him. All these years while we thought we were alone. Request permission to dock, Hyunwoo sent the message, his voice tight with emotion. For the first time in his life, he was speaking to free humans who weren't slaves or rebels. People who had never known chains. The response came quickly. Rebel Fleet Defiance, you are cleared for Docking Bay 7. But be advised, your arrival has caused significant debate among our council. Not everyone is happy you're here. The greeting party that met them was mixed. Some people looked at the refugees with sympathy, offering food and medical attention. Others watched with suspicion, particularly when they saw the spear of the last stand on Daewon's back. Its cold flames drew every eye. Director Hansol led the council, a man in his 60s who carried himself with careful authority. Welcome to Haven Station, he said, though his tone suggested the welcome was conditional. We've heard reports of your activities, raids on Vraxian supply depots, freed slaves, and you carry one of the ancient weapons we thought lost. The Spear of the Last Stand, Bora said, stepping forward. I've studied the historical records. This weapon is part of humanity's heritage. It's also a beacon for Vraxian attention. Hansol looked at Daewon directly. We've survived by being invisible, by not drawing the Empire's anger. Your rebellion threatens that survival. Before Daewon could respond, an older woman pushed through the crowd. Her hair was white, her face lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She stared at the spear with recognition that went beyond simple knowledge. That's impossible, she said quietly. The Spear of the Last Stand was lost when Champion Minseo fell in the final battle of Earth. I watched it happen. The crowd went silent. The old woman approached Daewon slowly, her eyes never leaving the spear. When she stood before him, she knelt, placing one hand over her heart. I am Jae-min, last survivor of the Earth Defense Force. I fought in the First War. I knew the champions who wielded the ancient weapons. She looked up at Daewon, tears in her eyes. I never thought I would see this weapon again. That any champion would rise again. I'm not really a champion, Daewon said. I was just a slave who polished weapons. The spear chose me, but I don't know why. The weapons always knew. Jaemin stood with difficulty, and Daewon helped her up. They chose not based on skill, but on character. On the capacity to stand against impossible odds and fight anyway. She turned to the council. This man carries the first weapon. That means something. It means the time for hiding may be over. The council chamber erupted in argument. Director Hansol called for order repeatedly while different voices shouted over each other. Finally, Commander So-jin, Haven's military leader, stood and spoke. I've reviewed the reports on these rebels. Yes, their actions drew Vraxian attention, but they also freed over 300 slaves. They destroyed 4 supply depots. They proved that humans can fight back. She looked at Daewon. For 70 years we've been safe by being invisible. But invisible means powerless. Maybe it's time to choose different. And risk everything we've built? Hansol shot back. One rebel group with one ancient weapon against the entire Vraxian Empire? That's not courage, that's suicide. Maybe. Daewon spoke up, his voice carrying across the chamber. But there's something you need to know. The Spear of the Last Stand isn't the only ancient weapon that survived. There are 12 weapons total. The spear showed me where they are, hidden across 8 star systems. If we can recover them, find champions to wield them, we might actually have a chance. The chamber fell silent. Bora projected the data she had decrypted, showing the locations of the other weapons. Tactical displays lit up across the walls, plotting routes and calculating probabilities. 12 champions, Jaemin said softly, like in the old days. But finding the weapons is one thing. Finding people worthy to wield them is another. The weapons test their bearers. Many die in the choosing. I know. Daewon thought of his own choosing, how close he had come to death. But we have to try. One weapon isn't enough. We need all 12 if we're going to truly challenge the Empire. The council debated for hours. The younger generation of Haven spoke passionately for action, tired of hiding. The older members argued for caution, remembering the cost of the First War. Director Hansol remained unconvinced, seeing only the risk. Finally, Jaemin asked to speak. The council quieted out of respect for her age and experience. I am 93 years old, she began. I have lived my entire life in hiding, watching from the shadows while our species served as slaves. We built something good here, something safe, but safety is not the same as freedom. She looked at Hansol. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of hiding. If this young man and his ancient spear are offering us a chance to stand again, to fight for our future instead of just surviving, Then I say we take that chance. The vote was close. Several council members wanted to refuse the rebels entirely, send them away before they drew Imperial attention, but Jamin's words had impact. The final count was 8 votes for supporting the rebellion, 7 against. It's decided, Commander Sojin said. Haven Station will commit resources to recovering the ancient weapons. But this needs to be done carefully. 12 simultaneous raids on heavily guarded locations. We'll need months to prepare. We don't have months, Hyunwoo interjected. Huntmaster Vexral is tracking us. The longer we stay in one place, the easier we make his job. Then we prepare quickly, Sojin replied. I can commit 20 warships and 4,000 soldiers. Combined with your forces, we might pull this off. Over the following weeks, Haven Station transformed into a war camp. Volunteers came forward to potentially become champions, knowing the weapons might kill them. Daewon trained them using techniques drawn from the Spear's memories and Aegis's programs. Ships were armed and supplied. Intelligence gathered on the weapon locations, but the preparation took its toll on Daewon. The Spear demanded he push the trainees harder, show no mercy, force them to their limits. Jia watched him growing more distant, more focused on the coming battles than the people he was supposedly fighting for. You're becoming what you fought against, she told him one night. The Vraxians treated us as tools. You're treating these volunteers the same way. Her words cut deep. Daewon looked at his hands, seeing them covered in bruises from training accidents. He had been so focused on making warriors that he'd forgotten they were people first. I don't know how else to prepare them, he admitted. The weapons will test them harshly. If I'm easy on them now, they'll die when it matters. There's a difference between being harsh and being cruel, between preparing people and breaking them. Jia took his hands. Remember why we're doing this. Not to become better killers, but to free our people. Don't lose yourself in the weapon's purpose. That night, Daewon underwent the ritual Bora had discovered in the ancient files, connecting fully with the Spear's consciousness to unlock the precise locations of the other ancient weapons. The process was dangerous, potentially fatal, but necessary. In a specially built chamber, Daewon let the Spear merge completely with his mind. He experienced the memories of every champion who had ever wielded it. Their victories and defeats, their courage and fears, their deaths over and over, always buying time for others to escape. The pain was beyond description. But he emerged with the knowledge they needed. 11 weapon locations across 8 star systems. Specific coordinates, security details, everything required for the raids. Daewon presented the information to the council. Han Sol still looked skeptical, but he had agreed to support the mission. This will draw every Vraxian fleet in the sector, he warned. Once we start, there's no going back. I know, Daewon replied, but hiding hasn't saved us. It's just prolonged our captivity. It's time to fight back. Commander Sojin began organizing the strike teams. 12 teams, each with specific targets, all launching simultaneously to prevent the Vraxians from reinforcing any single location. Hyunwoo would lead one team. Yonseo, a former Vraxian soldier who had defected to their cause, would lead another. Experienced fighters from Haven would command the rest. As the fleet prepared to launch, Jamin approached Daewon one final time. I'm too old to fight, she said. But I want you to know something. 70 years ago, I watched humanity fall because we were divided, unprepared, and overconfident. We thought we could never lose. Now we have a chance to rise again. Don't make the same mistakes we did. What mistakes? Thinking that weapons alone win wars. They don't. People win wars. Courage and sacrifice and the willingness to stand together. The 12 ancient weapons are powerful, but they're just tools. The real strength has to come from us. Daewon nodded, understanding. The Spear pulsed in agreement, as if it had been trying to tell him the same thing all along. The fleet launched a few days later. 32 ships heading to 12 different systems, carrying the hope of every slave in the galaxy. But as they disappeared, the 12 raids happened simultaneously across 8 star systems. Daewon watched from Haven Station's command center as tactical reports flooded in from each strike team. Some missions succeeded quickly. Others turned into desperate battles. 2 ships were lost completely, their crews dying to recover weapons that humanity desperately needed. Yunwoo led his team deep into a Vraxian fortress world, fighting through layers of security to reach a sealed vault. The Sword of Breaking Dawn waited inside, its blade glowing with inner fire. When Hyunwoo touched it, The weapon blazed to life, choosing him instantly. He fought his way back out, the sword moving like lightning in his hands. Yonseo recovered the shield of the Unbroken from an asteroid field where it had drifted for decades. The moment she lifted it, massive barriers of energy formed around her, deflecting fire from pursuing Vraxian fighters. She had been an enemy once, but the shield saw only her determination to protect others. Taeyang retrieved the bow of distant stars from a derelict warship, his pilot's precision allowing him to navigate deadly debris fields that had stopped all previous attempts. The bow sang as it chose him, arrows of pure energy forming from nothing. Bora, to everyone's surprise, was chosen by the staff of ancient knowledge. The elderly archivist, who had spent 15 years as a slave, suddenly found herself connected to tactical information spanning 3 millennia. She could see battle patterns before they formed, predict enemy movements, coordinate allies with supernatural precision, but not all choosings were successful. 3 volunteers died as weapons rejected them violently. 2 more were scarred for life, their bodies unable to handle the ancient power, and 3 weapons remained in Vraxian hands, the strike teams unable to break through security in time. 9 champions. 9 ancient weapons recovered. It would have to be enough. They gathered at Haven Station, these unlikely warriors. A former slave who polished weapons, a young rebel who never knew freedom until he took it, a defector who chose humanity over her birth species, a pilot who remembered flying before chains, an old woman who found purpose in her final years, 4 others from Haven's younger generation, each carrying weapons that had chosen them for reasons they barely understood. Training them nearly broke Day One. The weapons demanded perfection, pushing their champions beyond human limits. But Jia's earlier words stayed with him. He remembered to see them as people, not just warriors. To push them hard but not break them. To prepare them for war while keeping their humanity intact. It took 3 months. 3 months of brutal training, tactical coordination, learning to fight as a unit instead of individuals. The champions grew stronger, faster, more capable, but they also grew closer, forming bonds that went beyond military necessity. Then Admiral Cross arrived. The Vraxian fleet appeared at the edge of the system with overwhelming force. 100 warships, 50,000 soldiers, orbital bombardment platforms capable of cracking planets. The largest military operation the Empire had launched since the First War. "They're not here to capture," Commander So-Jin said grimly, studying the fleet composition. "They're here to annihilate." Director Hansol's face went pale. "This is what I warned about. Our location is compromised. Everything we've built for 70 years will be destroyed. Then we fight," Day One said simply. "We evacuate who we can and the rest of us hold them as long as possible." The evacuation began immediately. Civilian transports launched carrying non-combatants to hidden coordinates deep in unknown space. Haven's defenders, soldiers, champions, and volunteers prepared for the battle of their lives. The Vraxian assault was methodical and brutal. They didn't rush in carelessly. Admiral Cross was too experienced for that. Instead, they established a perimeter, cut off escape routes, and began systematically destroying Haven's defenses. The 10 champions became the difference between survival and annihilation. Day One led them in desperate counterstrikes, boarding Vraxian capital ships, destroying crucial systems, creating chaos in the enemy's orderly assault. Hyunwoo's sword cut through bulkheads and shields like they were paper. Yonseo's shield protected entire sections of Haven from bombardment. Bora coordinated their movements with impossible precision, always knowing where they were needed most. But the Vraxians kept coming. For every ship they destroyed, 2 more took its place. Haven Station shuddered under constant fire, its structure beginning to fail. Then Huntmaster Vexrel boarded. He came with an elite team, cutting through defenders like they weren't there. His target was clear, the command center where Day One coordinated the defense. The Huntmaster who had never failed a mission, facing the slave who dared to fight back. They met on Haven's central platform, surrounded by burning wreckage and the sounds of battle. Vexrel moved with the confidence of a predator who had cornered his prey. "You have caused significant trouble, human," Vexrel said, his weapons humming with power. "But all prey eventually falls to the hunter. Today you fall, the duel was savage." Vexrel was everything Day One wasn't. Trained from birth, experienced in 1,000 battles, equipped with the Empire's finest weapons. They moved across the platform in a deadly dance. the spear's cold flames clashing against Vraxian technology. Day-Wan fought the way the spear wanted him to, using techniques from ancient champions. But Vexral adapted to every move, countered every strike. The Huntmaster was winning. Then Day-Wan remembered something Jia had said months ago. He was trying to be the ancient champions instead of being himself. He was fighting like a warrior when he had spent 30 years being something else. He had been a man who noticed details, who studied patterns, who understood weapons better than anyone because he had spent his life maintaining them. He stopped fighting like a champion and started fighting like Day-Wan. He watched Vexral's movements, not as combat forms but as mechanical patterns. He noticed the slight delay in the Huntmaster's left arm, evidence of an old injury incompletely healed. He saw the rhythm of attacks, the way Vexral always feinted right before committing left. For 30 years, Day-Wan had found weaknesses in metal and crystal. Now he found the weakness in a living weapon. The next time Vexral feinted right, Day-Wan didn't follow the obvious movement. He struck left, fast and low, exactly where the old injury made defense slowest. The spear of the last stand pierced through Vraxian armor and into Vexral's hearts. The Huntmaster fell, his eyes wide with shock that his prey had become a predator. Across the battlefield, the other champions saw Vexral's death. Something changed in them, a surge of confidence that turned desperation into determination. Bora coordinated a devastating counterattack. Yunwu and Yonseo led boarding teams onto Admiral Cross's flagship. Taeyang's arrows found critical systems with impossible accuracy. The tide turned. Slowly, impossibly, the defenders began winning. Vraxian ships withdrew, damaged and confused. Their orderly assault became chaos as champions tore through their formations. On his flagship, Admiral Cross faced a choice that no Vraxian admiral had faced in 70 years. Continue and ensure mutual destruction, or retreat and admit defeat. For the first time in his career, Admiral Cross ordered a withdrawal. The Vraxian fleet pulled back, leaving Haven Station battered but standing. The impossible had happened. Humans had won. The cost was severe. 7,000 defenders dead. 2 champions fallen in battle, their weapons dimming and waiting for new bearers. Haven Station crippled but repairable. But they had survived, and survival meant everything. That evening, Day-Wan stood before a crowd of thousands in Haven's largest gathering space. The spear rested quietly at his side, its flames gentle and warm. He looked at the faces before him. Freed slaves, Haven citizens, alien allies, all looking to him for words he didn't have prepared. "I was a slave for 30 years, he began, his voice carrying through the space. "I polished weapons for people who conquered my world and killed my family. I learned not to hope, not to dream, not to imagine that things could be different." He lifted the spear, its flames brightening. "Then this weapon chose me. Not because I was special, not because I was skilled, but because I was willing to stand even when standing seemed impossible. And that choice changed everything." He looked at the other champions standing nearby. "We're not gods. We're not unstoppable. 2 of us died today. More will die tomorrow. But we're fighting back. We're proving that humans don't have to live on their knees. And that example, that spark of resistance, is spreading across the galaxy." The crowd listened in silence. Day-Wan continued, his words coming from the heart rather than any plan. "News of this battle will reach every slave station, every conquered world, every place where humans serve the Empire. They'll hear that we fought an Imperial fleet and won. They'll hear that champions have risen. They'll hear that hope is possible." He paused, then spoke the words that felt most true. "We're not trying to return to what we were. We're building what we'll become, a humanity that remembers its courage but learns from its failures. That fights for freedom but doesn't become the oppressor. That stands together instead of divided." Jia stepped beside him, taking his hand. Around them, the other champions moved closer, forming a circle of unity. And the crowd, thousands of people who had been slaves or